Wrapping up the AFC North with special guest Kyle Hunter to discuss all things Cincinnati Bengals. If you are new to this series, I think this is my seventh team now, and we're pretty much halfway through the AFC. I encourage you to go to my YouTube page and look at the introductory video so that you know kind of what the format is, since we have all the data points now. We have how they did at the end of last year, how we felt about them. We have the schedule. We have the exact schedule. We have free agency. We have the draft. There's not that much else that's going to be new. So Kyle's going to go through all things Cincinnati Bengals. How are you today?
I'm doing well, Ron. I've been focusing in here on baseball and finishing NBA and already looking at the college football. You know how that schedule has kind of changed, but I'm looking forward to talking NFL here today. So good to be with you.
Yeah. Well, Kyle, let's start kind of at the end of 2023. My stat sheet takeaways were disappointing. Obviously, no Joe Burrow, so that hurt in a tough division, but they were 1-5 in divisional play. That was my first thing that I noticed. They still had some trouble stopping the run. I like what they're doing in terms of the transition with defensive back, with the backfield, moving people around, drafting people, and so on. But it's a work in progress. Where are you as far as right now, not only at the end of the season, but after free agency?
So the Bengals have a quality team, obviously. It matters a lot whether Burrow's healthy. We have to be honest. That's the most important thing to start with. Even some of the time Burrow was playing last year, he clearly wasn't completely healthy. If he's totally healthy, he's an elite quarterback. I'm not going to get into the rankings debate that people do, but we know that Joe Burrow is an excellent quarterback, really good. There's a lot of teams that be super happy to have him. I like to see him bulking up, gaining some weight. And that's kind of the knock on Burrow at this point. If you have a knock on him, is that he's gotten injured too many times. If he can stay healthy, I like the Bengals' chances. You and I were discussing briefly beforehand, the biggest negative for me is the Bengals playing a really tough division. I mean, everybody in this division, they could be far better if they were playing in a different division. And, you can't really say, I mean, the Steelers are kind of said to be the team that I think they have the lowest win total here in this division. But I mean, every year Tomlin's teams have a winning record. If somebody wants to bet under on the Steelers win total, I understand why they do if you look at the schedule. But I mean, it's been a bad move in the past, so it's not something I'm going to do. I think the Bengals have kind of built their team. Ron, I've heard some other people say this in the past, and it feels like the Bengals have kind of built their team to beat like the Chiefs or the Bills in the playoffs. And some of the other teams in the AFC North have kind of built their teams to beat the AFC North teams. So the question is, can the Bengals beat those AFC North teams enough? Because you have to beat enough of those teams to be able to get to play in the playoffs and play against a team like the Bills or the Chiefs. I think the Bengals can beat anybody, but they need to be far more consistent. I think the loss of DJ Reader is a really big loss. Reader was fantastic. I know he missed a decent amount of last year, and that has something to do with why their run numbers were so weak last season. I know they tried to replace him. I think that's a question mark because Reader was better than most people realize, in my opinion. And I agree with you. They're doing a pretty good job with trying to move the corners. A little surprised they didn't draft another corner. I know they drafted one. But in general, I mean, the Bengals have a good team. They need Burrow to stay healthy badly. They did finally draft an offensive lineman with their first pick. We can talk about that more here in a bit. But I like the Bengals' chances if Burrow can stay healthy. That is an if.
Yeah. So I'm putting up kind of what we're going through now, and we're ready to talk about the draft. I do like your point in terms of how the Bengals are built. They played very well against Kansas City and against Buffalo, and now they have to do it inside of the division, of course. So we look at the draft. My top needs coming in were offensive lineman, tight end, and run stopper. And I think they hit them. The question is, and this is the question posed to you, is how comfortable are you that this is, in my opinion, a little bit more of a higher risk, higher reward draft than I'm used to seeing from Cincinnati? But if you ask me, they attack some of these needs pretty head on. Walk us through what you saw in terms of meeting your needs and who they chose.
Yeah, I think offensive line was their strongest need coming into it. Probably the run stopper being second. Um, Burrow has done a good job making multiple tight ends look good. So, tight end is a need. I think Burrow can make a solid tight end look like a really good tight end if he's healthy. Um, Cornerback, I would say, was a need as well based on just the stats from last year. Hopefully some of the young guys will improve. But as far as the draft, I completely agree with you that it was kind of a higher risk. They have several high ceiling, low floor guys here, to where it's a little bit hard to project exactly what they will be. They could look like geniuses in a few years. Let's start with Mims. Mims was a debated pick because I felt like there were more safe picks out there, but Mims had as much upside as anybody that was available at that spot. It looks like the Bengals tried to, hit a grand slam. We'll see if they can here in this one. The other one I would say that about is Jermaine Burton, the third round pick. Burton has had some off the field issues. I don't think anybody questions his talent. Can he be that guy that steps up if Higgins is gone and it's just Chase and whoever there? I think that's the other question mark. I wonder if McKinley Jackson wasn't. I think he might have been drafted a bit before some people expected him to be drafted there in the third round. So I'd be curious where your notes had him going. I do like the second pick, Chris Jenkins. I know I'm a Buckeyes fan, but I can admit Chris Jenkins was a good play, a good pick, I think, in my opinion. Defensive tackle, great motor, really good team chemistry guy. I think that was a really solid second round pick.
I agree with you on all of that. Yeah, I have to chuckle because my grade on McKinley Jackson was 5th to 6th round.
Ooh,
so
man.
You're right. I think he was drafted a little. I mean, this is the bottom end of the third, so it's kind of like bottom third, top fourth, but he's still a little bit overdrafted. Chris Jenkins, the safe pick for me. Mims, 8 starts in college, but a high ceiling. I thought his range was right here, 18 to 30. The first team that I thought he should have been drafted to would be this team, the Cincinnati Bengals. And Burton, if you're I say drafted nowadays with pay for play in college, you're kind of drafted to a college team. So he's drafted by Alabama, and by all reports and stuff like that, he should have had a better career, but his upside is enormous. His yards per reception is good. And then you mentioned the tight ends, Ali. I mean, he comes from a football factory of tight ends with Iowa. So I kind of like what they did. And I think we're in agreement in terms of this could be really good. Want to get one final thought on this area, and that's how many of these people do you think contribute in 2024?
I hadn't really thought about that too much. Mims has to. I mean, if he doesn't right away, that was a bad pick because they need him immediately. This is not a place where they can just have him wait behind somebody else. I think Jenkins will contribute right away, definitely. Burton probably sees the field a decent amount here this year because the Bengals kind of lack the depth that they've had at wide receiver in the past. I think, Irwin's kind of a decent depth guy, but Burton has much more upside than somebody like that. So I think he could slot in ahead of him. The tight ends probably see the field a decent amount here this year too, because they're not exactly stacked at tight end. Other than that, I don't know that, I would assume that, Ole Miss, Anthony at safety probably doesn't see the field much. Matt Lee, probably not yet. I'm curious, Ron, if Josh Newton, the cornerback from TCU, gets in the rotation at all. I mean, I was looking at the pass defense stats from last year. The Bengals gave up 8.1 yards per pass attempt, which was worst in the NFL. Really bad. I think you could argue that was multiple things. Awuzie getting hurt last year was obviously a massive deal. He was very good. He's gone now. You bring in, you switch over Turner. Is Turner going to be able to be good? They have kind of a Michigan secondary back there. Those do the Bengals at this point. Newton, I think, will need to be a contributor in order for the pass defense to be good enough, because I think they kind of lack depth at the corner spots, and we know that it's liable to be somebody gets hurt. That's the spot where a lot of people get hurt pretty often in the NFL. But as a Bengals fan, I'm hoping quite a few of these guys see the field and play well this year. That's for sure.
I think most of them will stick. I think it's another draft, even though I said somebody like McKinley Jackson had a 5th, 6th round grade for me. All of these guys had grades that were draft worthy, and not all teams can do that, especially since I only rated about 230 players and there's 257 picks. So automatically there's 27 spots that I don't think people drafted are worthy of being in the NFL. And typically there's mistakes made by a lot of other teams. So since he didn't make any mistakes as far as draft eligible players, Newton's an important part, because what you mentioned about cornerback play, I seem to intentionally downgrade TCU corners because their risk reward in college, the way TCU plays its cornerbacks, they give up big plays. So I have a little concern about that. So I had him a little bit lower rated, 6th round grade instead of a 5th, not that much. But if Cincinnati can teach him up, and of course they have that same defensive coordinator that's there, I think he sticks, and I think he does contribute at some point. Let's pivot just a little bit. I want to talk about one position before we get into the schedule and their odds. And that's wide receiver, which is probably in a first of a 2-year transition. They drafted 2 last year, lightly used guys, but one of them was used as a punt returner, I believe, Jones. And they drafted 1 again this year. They lost Boyd. They're probably going to be looking at Higgins for just 1 more year. How do you think this transition evolves?
Yeah, I think last year we had Charlie Jones play mainly as a returner, like you said, and the guy from Princeton. I don't even know how to pronounce his last name, but
I'm not going to try.
yeah. The guy from Princeton actually looks like a solid player. I wouldn't be surprised if he sees the field a bit more this year. I think he, has the height at 6'3", that could plug in pretty well. Charlie Jones is kind of a game breaker that you could get big plays out of. They're going to count on Burton being able to step up right away. Now, Higgins was banged up a lot of last year too. He was never really healthy completely, even when he was out there. I think Chase is and like I said, I'm not real big into ranking wide receivers or quarterbacks or anything, but Chase is one of the best wide receivers in the NFL for sure. And his connection with Burrow is just about second to none, the way that they know each other. And I think that will continue to work very well. I also think, like I said earlier about the tight ends, this kind of makes me sound like a huge Joe Burrow guy. And I obviously I am. I'm a big Joe Burrow fan and a big Bengals fan. But I think Burrow makes wide receivers look pretty good in general. Some guys that would be, 3rd, 4th, 5th receivers, I think they can look like a 2nd or 3rd receiver instead, as long as Burrow has time to throw. And Burrow having time to throw and not getting injured has really been the massive problem for the Bengals. So hopefully the offensive line comes together. The Bengals have had a lot of injuries on the offensive line the last few years too. Even when they made that playoff run a couple of years ago, the year after they went to the Super Bowl, they were really banged up on the offensive line when they had put a lot of money into offensive linemen, Kappa and Karras and guys like that. So I think wide receiver wise, Tyler Boyd was not nearly what he used to be. So I don't know that he's as big of a loss as some people would think. I think they're okay here. I'm not saying that they have great wide receivers, but I think they're good enough.
That's fair. Now before we get into the divisional and season win odds, we have to take a look at the schedule now that we have it out. We knew their uncommon opponents, and this is one of their advantages, getting that 4th place schedule: New England, Tennessee, and Carolina. That's massively important as you compare it to what Cleveland, Pittsburgh, and Baltimore have to deal with. That's a plus. The minus I saw, it's kind of a weird schedule. Kind of want to get your thoughts on that. 4 primetime road games, I believe. 3 games early in the season. At least it's early in the season in a compressed time format. Kind of, I think it's about 3 games in 11 days. A lot of primetime games at sites they're not familiar with. They are rested in December for a playoff push. What are your thoughts on the schedule? Because that's really going to play into how we feel about season wins and divisional odds.
Yeah, I mean, the Bengals have made a habit of having these slow starts where at the beginning of the season, Burrow's recovering from an injury. Again, he's going to be recovering from an injury.
Yeah.
Hopefully, the Bengals start faster than they have because Kansas City, the second game, obviously at Kansas City is a really tough game. But in general, the beginning of their schedule is the weakest part of their schedule.
Right.
You have home against New England, home against Washington, at Carolina early in the season. The Bengals will need to start faster than they have in some of the other years. Because when I look at the schedule, I see the time frame between October 20th and November 17th at Cleveland, and then home against Philly, home against Las Vegas, at Baltimore on short rest on November 7th, and then at LA Chargers. I think that's a tough stretch. I mean, you look at, I don't know that, probably only Las Vegas would be considered not a really tough matchup. And, there's no gimmies in the NFL. So you go at Cleveland, at Baltimore on short rest, at the Chargers. I think the Chargers, are going to be coached better this year. I don't think that would shock anybody to say that. And, I think that's a really tough part of the schedule. So the Bengals need to go into that with a decent record because it would be tough for anybody to run through that part of the schedule unscathed.
One thing that scares me as we look at their divisional odds and so on is actually the last game of the season. And that's because Pittsburgh generally plays well. Pittsburgh doesn't let down. They have a good last game history, and they're going to have a 4-day rest advantage, I believe. Yes, in terms of that last game. So if you're a Cincinnati fan, if you're a Cincinnati backer, you probably want to have a little cushion going into that last game rather than have that be the decider. Season wins 10.5, which I think is reflective of the fourth place schedule. I was a little surprised we saw 10.5. Mostly, I would say around minus 130. Divisional odds, clear second choice in the division at about plus 170 on FanDuel. Any thoughts on season wins, divisional odds?
So second favorite in the division is probably correct. I just don't think that plus 170 is enough to be betting the Bengals to win this division. There's just so many teams here. We talked about at the beginning, Ron. I mean, there's so many teams that could win this division. It wouldn't shock either one of us. You got to give me better than plus 170 Bengals to win this. I mean, even a Bengals guy who wants to root for the Bengals, I still want to make money. Plus 170 is not enough. I think the Bengals upside. Maybe this will be controversial. Let's see what your take is on this. I think the Bengals upside is probably the highest of any team in this division, but the Bengals have enough question marks that things could go sideways. I don't think over 10.5 is a great bet either. I think that there are enough question marks, injury concerns. If everything goes right for the Bengals, if some of these picks are great, if Mims is fantastic, if the offensive line in general, they made some offseason acquisitions too, obviously, that could make them better on the offensive line. I think the Bengals upside is really high. They have a great defensive coordinator, great quarterback that can, you pair. I think Zach Taylor has proven himself to be a pretty good coach at this point too, especially the team really likes him. These guys play really hard for Zach Taylor. I think the Bengals have the highest upside of any team in this division. The problem is, I think the Bengals' floor is probably lower than several of the other teams in the division. I mean, Cleveland's a really good team too. I mean, they don't have the star quarterback that the Bengals do, but Cleveland is very strong in the trenches. Baltimore is always very good. This is a Baltimore team that I think deserves to be the favorite because Baltimore doesn't have as many question marks as does Ohio State. That's funny. Cincinnati. This is a Bengals team that I think deserves to be second favorite here in this, but what is it, like plus 170 for the Bengals? And I think the next team was plus 400 or 500. If the Bengals were plus 250 or plus 300, I think it might be worth a bet here, but plus 170, not enough for me.
Yeah, I went into the offseason before the draft thinking that if the Bengals draft well, and they generally do, they're one of those teams that focuses on their needs and they hit their needs, then I thought I would be looking with that fourth place schedule as a divisional, looking at those divisional odds. But I agree with you. Plus 170 just isn't fair in this division. There's enough schedule inconsistencies even with the three uncommon opponents that scare me just a little bit. I want to go to the final slide here, and that would be my takeaways, and you can comment on these and then your own takeaways as we have all the data points filled. Another focused draft class. I think that's a given. We both agree with that. They plug some holes. Continuity, the wide receiver transition, the attempt to fill the run defense, that key offensive lineman that they hope they have for a decade. How long will that succession plan take? That's the big question for me, because they're still fiddling around with moving safety to a cornerback and doing some of the things. Replacing Jesse Bates is still in a second-year transition in that area. This one we haven't talked about. +7 fumble ratio is hard to replicate. And I think that's one of the strengths of Joe Mixon. And Joe Mixon was slowing down. His yards per carry wasn't where it needs to be in the NFL. But what he did do is he just held onto the ball. He never fumbled. And I think replacing that, I think you can expect the fumble ratio not to be +7 next year. And so there's going to be some regression there. And then finally, the early key is, keep Joe Burrow upright. He's a top 3 quarterback if you can have him for all 17 games. And then flipping that 1-5 divisional record. Kyle, your thoughts and your closing thoughts in general.
Yeah, I mean, Ron's the one that said it here. If you're watching back on it, he said he's a top 3 quarterback. I was trying to stay away from it. But I will say some of these lists, and you know this, Ron, you see lists of quarterback rankings, and they're clearly just trying to troll somebody or try to get, clickbait or something like that. You see Burrow listed like 11th or something like that. I'm like, what is going on? Like, there's no way anybody else actually thinks that. Some Bengals fans are a bit aggressive in their take that, they try to put Burrow first. I mean, Mahomes has clearly been the best, and nobody else can claim the top spot at quarterback. But Burrow's excellent. Keeping him upright and healthy is the key. I do think if he stays healthy, they'll win more games inside the division just by Burrow being healthy. But the other thing that I think I haven't mentioned yet, I think the defensive line kind of concerns me a little bit. I know Hendrickson asked for a trade there and then is kind of back in the fold at this point. But Hendrickson was really only great pass rusher they had. I mean, they really don't have a tremendous pass rush. Hubbard is better against the run than he is at rushing the passer. I like Hubbard, obviously. But I think the Bengals really do need a better pass rush, especially given that the cornerbacks are a bit of a concern. To me, tough division, really tough division. They have some really good coaches against them in this division. Like I said, I do think Taylor is a good coach. Tomlin's a fantastic coach. Harbaugh's definitely a good coach. The Browns are well coached. The Browns have a very solid team in the trenches. If you told me the Bengals were going to go 12-5, I would not be. There are 17 games again, right, Ron?
Yeah.
Okay, so
still just 17.
I was going to say, like, we're changing everything here in college football. I know we added one extra week to the NFL. I didn't want to sound like an idiot here, but if you said they were going to be 12-5, I wouldn't be shocked. If you said they, went under 500, it wouldn't stun me, because maybe it meant injuries and depth concerns and things like that. But overall, I think the Bengals' upside is very high. Can they reach that? I think it depends on the line play on both sides quite a bit. They need to be able to stop the run better. I think you make a good point on the fumbles. Mixon was not as good here in recent years as he has been. And I think they do have running backs now that are probably more explosive than Mixon. If they can be close to as good at holding the football, then, that could be a wash or an upgrade. But you make a good point there about the fumbles. So I think the Bengals have high upside. Being that the case, if you want to bet the Bengals here, I would suggest even betting them to win the AFC or win the Super Bowl probably makes more sense than trying to bet an over or even to win the division, because you're getting the much bigger odds, obviously, and you're not taking as much of a risk.
Yeah, good point there. I think we're kind of in agreement that this is a really good team with a very good roster. but there's enough moving parts, either due to schedule or due to transition and upside or downside with the draft class, that it's hard to say, wow, I really like this team, or I wouldn't fade this team, but I just can't go to the window on them. But I think they're a fun watch. I really like watching the Bengals, and maybe we'll see some clues in August and September that will get us to really looking at whether or not we want the rookies are contributing and to what extent the rookies are contributing. I've got 9 shows planned next week to wrap up the AFC. Some more special guests, just like Kyle. Kyle, great content today. I appreciate that you spending some time with me, especially since you're not just football, you're all over the place. So I know there's a lot of things you're working on simultaneously. And I don't even want to begin to talk about what the prep is going to be necessary for college football.
Ooh.
But thanks so much for spending time to talk about Cincinnati with me.
Yeah, great to join you, Ron. Thank you.
Okay. Again, subscribe, look at some of the other videos, comment. If you have things that we didn't cover in this particular 20 plus minutes, just let me know and I'll respond on YouTube. Thanks for watching, and then we'll be back next week. I'll be back next week with more AFC videos.